Welcome to this edition of Head to Head. I'm your host, Cam McKinney, and this is episode number 247 of the podcast. And on this week's episode, I'm talking about one of the unsung heroes of the Boston Celtics, point guard Derrick White. When you talk about the Boston Celtics this season, you talk about Jason Tatum, the MVP candidate, Jaylen Brown, the All-Star, Marcus Smart, the Defensive Player of the Year, and Robert Williams, the freakishly athletic big man. Most people do not bring up the name Derrick White, who's reliable and consistent but not flashy. That is until his recent stretch of play. The Celtics have recently been without Marcus Smart, and Derrick White has been starting in his place, and last week White won Eastern Conference Player of the Week, averaging 24.5 points per game, 7.5 assists, and close to 5 rebounds, while shooting over 51% from three. White has hit multiple three-pointers in 11 consecutive games. That's the second longest current streak in the entire NBA, behind only Steph Curry. A lot of you hearing those stats may be wondering why a guy like Derrick White, who is putting up those ridiculous numbers, isn't a regular starting point guard in the first place. And here's what it comes down to. In this last decade or so in the NBA, the point guard position has become the most star-studded position in the sport, with the likes of guys like Derrick Rose, Russell Westbrook, Chris Paul, Steph Curry, Dame Lillard, Ja Morant. And what do these guys have in common other than Chris Paul? They are score-first point guards who consistently score 20 points and are the best players on their team. White, throughout his career, averages just under 12 points per game, and right now there are 12 current point guards in the NBA averaging more than 20 points per game. Let's put that into perspective. In 2007, for example, there were only 2 point guards who averaged 20 points per game, and Derrick Rose was the only point guard in the entire NBA who averaged 20 points per game back in 2010. The point guard's job used to be just to set the pace of the game and to facilitate the ball to his teammates. Now the point guard is asked to do everything, and part of that has to do with who is actually playing the point guard position in today's NBA. You see guys like Luka Doncic playing point guard and Russell Westbrook. These guys are not real point guards. They are just super athletic freaks whose teams want them to have the ball in every single moment of the game. They are not true old school point guards. When I think of point guards, I look at a guy like Jason Kidd. Jason Kidd was one of the best players in the NBA, but he didn't put up ridiculous numbers. Yes, we all know he routinely got triple doubles, but he wasn't scoring 20 points. In the scoring department, he was taking a back seat to guys like Vince Carter or Dirk Nowitzki. He knew he wasn't going to be the guy who takes the game-winning shots at the end of the day. Look at a guy like Steve Nash. He had guys like Dirk. He had guys like Amare Stoudemire. Steve Nash wasn't a guy who was averaging 20 points per game, but if he were playing in today's NBA, he probably would be asked to do so. The NBA point guard has become everything in the sport of basketball. They are the sport's biggest names. Guys like Ja Morant are the faces of the sport. I think a perfect example of what I'm talking about is John Stockton. John Stockton is the all-time assist leader in the NBA. He's a Hall of Fame player, but he wasn't even the best player on his own team because he defaulted to Karl Malone, who became the second leading scorer in NBA history until LeBron became the leading scorer, and now Kareem is the second. But the mailman was the face of the Utah Jazz. The Utah Jazz had arguably the best point guard in the entire NBA, yet he wasn't even the best player on his own team. At least when you look at it from a scoring point of view. Yes, obviously John Stockton did more than just pass the ball. I'm talking about strictly from scoring the ball. In the league today, that's what most point guards are asked to do. They are asked to be high scorers. That's why every point guard is a star almost. There's not really a role player who is the starting point guard of a team, and that's why Derrick White is not a starting point guard in today's NBA. Even when he was on the San Antonio Spurs, he played with a guy in Javonte Murray who was more of a scoring point guard. guard, and that's why the Spurs moved on from Derrick White, because he's not a score-first point guard. I think Derrick White would have better suited the NBA of yesteryear, because the NBA in the mid-90s and early 2000s had role players starting as point guards. White would have been a perfect starting point guard back when the league was dominated by big men. You had Shaquille O'Neal, Tim Duncan, Dirk, and Kevin Garnett. Just look at the guys who used to be starting point guards in the NBA. Derek Fisher, Jay Williams, Avery Johnson. These guys were starting point guards on teams that won NBA championships. They were role players who occasionally stepped up. White, to me, is a prototypical point guard who is consistent and makes the right decisions. I remember a time when most people would say that you're not going to win an NBA championship if your best player is a point guard. And now I think that point of view has changed, and I think it's for a few reasons. The Golden State Warriors have Steph Curry, who is a three-point machine. He's not really a traditional point guard whatsoever, and you could make the argument that Draymond Green does most of the point guard jobs on the Golden State Warriors. But Steph Curry has really changed a lot of people's minds when it comes to having a score-first point guard. I mean, yes, you would occasionally have teams that won the NBA championship have players whose best player was a point guard. The Lakers were winning with Magic Johnson. The Pistons were winning with Isaiah Thomas. But in the 90s and 2000s, the league really was dominated by big men. Again, you had Shaquille O'Neal winning 5 NBA championships. Tim Duncan winning 5 NBA championships. The league has really shifted to a place where we're now saying you can't win an NBA championship if your best player is a big man. That's why nobody really looks at the NBA right now and thinks that the season is going to end with either Joel Embiid or Nikola Jokic winning the NBA championship. Nobody thinks that's actually going to happen, and I think it's because of where we're at. We believe that the team that's going to win is going to have an elite point guard. Here's where I'm at with modern point guards. I like watching them. I think they're ridiculously talented. I'm a big fan of guys like Dame Lillard. He puts up numbers night after night, but I do miss those kind of role-playing point guards. My favorite all-time point guard is Rajon Rondo. He's just a guy who I think should be a point guard. He's pass first. Yes, some people think that he loved getting the assist way too much, but when I think of point guards and what I want from them, I think of a guy like Rajon Rondo. I also just think too many point guards are putting up ridiculous numbers in today's NBA because they have the ball in their hands all too often. I look at a guy like James Harden, I think he's great, but do I think he's that much better than a guy like Tony Parker back in the day or a guy like Chauncey Billups? No, I just think James Harden has the ball all the time, so he's at the end of the day, he's going to have ridiculous numbers. One of my favorite recent point guards was John Wall. I'm sad at what's happened with John Wall because I loved his game. I think he was becoming a better passer as time was going on. I think he was sick and tired of being the best player on his team. I think he was absolutely going to default to Bradley Beal at some point. I think John Wall was really one of the last true point guards. And that's what I see when I watch Derrick White play basketball. And I'll admit it, when I watch him play, I think sometimes he should be the Celtics' regular starting point guard. And I know that sounds crazy. The team not only has Marcus Smart, but they also have Malcolm Brogdon, a guy who can easily average 20 points a game. My feeling on the matter is Derrick White is a self-aware player who knows he is a role player. He's the type of guy you want playing with Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. He will defer to them, and Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum have played with star point guards before. Both of them played with Kyrie Irving. That did not work out at all. They also played with Kemba Walker. That didn't work. The Celtics right now are one of those teams that do not need a star playing the point guard position. And I know what you're going to say. Well, guess what? They don't have one. They have Marcus Smart. My biggest fear with Marcus Smart is his questionable decision making at the end of games. It could end up costing the Boston Celtics a chance of winning the NBA Finals. I think he almost cost them a chance of making the NBA Finals last season, the last few minutes against the Miami Heat in that Eastern Conference Finals matchup. And I know I'm not the only Boston Celtics fan that feels that way. I just feel like in today's NBA, it feels like there's a lot of positionless basketball going on, and we've lost sight of what an actual true starting point guard should look like. And I think Derrick White is that ideal guy that you want to be your team's starting point guard. There are going to be flashes of brilliance. I mean, look at what he's doing right now. He's playing like, and he won the Eastern Conference Player of the Week. There are days when he's going to look like a great player, and then there are days where he's going to take a back seat and let his teammates dominate. Those are the type of guys I want playing the point guard position. Unless I have a guy like Steph Curry, then I don't worry about those things. But the Celtics don't have that guy. So I think if you don't have that guy, you should look at a guy like Derrick White, who is a more traditional, classic point guard. Especially when you look at this current Boston Celtics team, they make bad decisions at the end of close games. I mean, they routinely made bad decisions during that NBA Finals. They were making turnovers. They were making bad decisions. Derrick White is not going to routinely make bad decisions if you put the ball in his hands. I'm not saying he's going to win you the games, but he's not going to lose them either. He is going to make the right choice. You are not going to feel like he cost you a game if he is in those positions. I feel like Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown are bringing up the ball way too often on this current Celtics team. So that's why I think you need a guy like Derrick White who can be that old school traditional point guard. And I don't mean this as a diss to Marcus Smart. I think he's an elite defender. I think the team needs him. I just don't think they need him to play the point guard position. He can be in the starting lineup. He can guard the opposing team's best offensive player. I just don't want him making crucial decisions at the end of games because I don't think he makes the right ones. And the other thing about Derrick White is you wouldn't be losing a lot on the defensive end. He's a really good perimeter defender and a surprisingly really good shot blocker. And he's only really super aggressive offensively when the team needs him to be. It's never in the way of what's going on. He's never in the way of the other players on his team. He's never felt like he's in the way of Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown. He knows his place on the team, and I think that's something that's lost in today's NBA. Derrick White understands his role on the team, and I've said this about the Celtics the last few years. They have a lot of really good players, but they don't seem to always understand what role on the team they are in. And right now, I think their bench players understand their role. Sam Hauser knows his role on the team. He's supposed to hit open three-point shots. Malcolm Brogdon understands his role on the team. He's the sixth man, and I think Derrick White knows his role on the team. He is a point guard, and I think he should be this team's starting point guard. I'm not here to attack Marcus Smart, but he does feel like the last guy on the team who doesn't fully understand what his role on the team should be when it comes to the offensive side of the floor. Yes, he's the team's best defensive player. He's last year's defensive player of the year, but he's a lot less limited offensively than a guy like Derrick White. Derrick White is a better passer, a better three-point shooter. And I don't want to belabor the point, but just a way better decision maker in crucial moments. I also just want to say I don't think Derrick White is going to be this team's starting point guard. I just believe he should be. They're going to keep Marcus Smart in that position. I just worry that him being in that position isn't going to get the job done when it comes to the NBA playoffs. I want this Celtics team to make it back to the NBA Finals and win the NBA Finals. Last year was a rough ending, and I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that they didn't have the right guy making those decisions with the ball. Jason Tatum should not have the ball as much as he did in that series against the Golden State Warriors. Jaylen Brown should not have the ball as much as they did because as great and as talented as they are as scoring options, they are not great ball handlers. I just think this team needs a guy like Derrick White who plays calmly in those big moments and isn't going to try to do too much. He's not going to try to be the savior of the team. He's only going to score 20 if the other two guys are having an off night. He's going to know his role on the team. I just like Derrick White because I feel like he's one of those few guys in the NBA who isn't trying to be a star player, and that's why I think I miss those old school point guards like the guys I mentioned, Avery Johnson, Jay Williams. Jay Williams was an excellent ball handler. He wasn't out here trying to be one of the best players in the league. He was just trying to play a role on a team, and eventually he was on a championship winning team, the 2006 Miami Heat that had Shaquille O'Neal and Dwayne Wade. Jay Williams just played a role on a team winning a championship. I'm personally kind of getting sick of this this idea that everybody who has a starting position in the NBA has to be a star player. It's okay if a role player is starting. I remember when the San Antonio Spurs were starting Bruce Bowen at the small forward spot. They had Tim Duncan. They had Tony Parker. Manu Ginobili was coming off the bench. It was fine that Bruce Bowen was there. The Spurs did not need a star-studded starting lineup. They just had a role player, and Bruce Bowen was an excellent defender. He was bringing something much needed to that lineup. Not every starting position needs to be a high-volume scoring option, and Derrick White can score the ball. He just doesn't score it at the rate of other starting point guards in the league. He's not Russell Westbrook. He's not Derrick Rose. He can have flashes of playing like that, like what we're seeing right now, but consistently, that's not who he's going to be, and I think that's okay. I just feel like the NBA doesn't feel like that's okay anymore. And that's why I'm really fascinated by watching a guy like Derrick White, because I know from watching the NBA for as long as I have that these kind of guys used to be every type of starting point guard. Now this guy can't even get a starting point guard job. I mean, now he's the third point guard on the Boston Celtics who's only starting because Marcus Smart is injured. Like, I just don't understand what has happened to the position, and I don't know if it will ever revert back. Will a guy like Derrick White ever be a starting point guard type again, or is this era of the 20 points per game, 10 assists point guard just the new normal? Like, I personally am not a huge fan of it. James Harden is currently the leading assist leader in the NBA, yet if you ask any fan in the NBA who the best passing point guard in the league is, no one is going to mention the names James Harden. I don't mean that as a diss. I just mean that as he's only the leading assist leader because he has the ball in his hands so much more often than anyone else on the Philadelphia 76ers, not named Joel Embiid. And I will say this, I think James Harden is a very good passer, but he's not as good a passer as Steve Nash used to be or Jason Kidd. That's the type of people I view as old school great passing point guards. Rajon Rondo. I don't feel like the league has those type of guys anymore. Chris Paul is really the last pure point guard who's starting in the NBA. I guess I just want those type of guys to return back to the NBA, and I feel like Derrick White could be a lesser version of those guys. Your starting point guard doesn't need to be an all-star caliber player. He can just be a very good NBA player who is capable of starting on a team, and I definitely feel like this current stretch that Derrick White is on is proving he is a starting point guard caliber player. Whether Derrick White ultimately starts or comes off the bench for the Boston Celtics, if the team ends up winning the NBA Finals, I believe Derrick White will play a bigger part in it than most people anticipate. I think he is a key cog as to why this team is thriving. They're super deep at the point guard position. I mean, a guy like Peyton Pritchard can't barely play because of how many point guards they have right now. They have three guys, and Marcus Smart, Derrick White, and Malcolm Brogdon. That's another thing that's super interesting about the Boston Celtics right now. Everything I've said about Derrick White, there are probably people out there, and I know there are, who feel this exact same way about Malcolm Brogdon. They believe he should be the Celtics starting point guard. Why I'm opposed to that is because, like I said, the Celtics do not need a score-first starting point guard. I do think they need a high-volume scorer off the bench. That's why I believe Malcolm Brogdon is the perfect sixth man for the Boston Celtics. They do not have a guy off the bench other than Brogdon who you can guarantee is going to score you 15 points a night. They need him in that role. I just feel like Derrick White is the person on the Celtics who is best suited to be their starting point guard because he is a true traditional classic starting point guard, the type of guy I really enjoyed watching when I was growing up watching the game of basketball. Yes, I enjoy seeing guys put up these high volume numbers, but at some point it becomes a little bit numb and it really isn't all that meaningful. I like seeing a guy who knows his role on the team and is in control of his game, and I just feel like that's Derrick White. Maybe I'm a bigger fan of Derrick White than most people are out there. I just feel like he is definitely a guy I would want on my basketball team and being my starting point guard. Yes, if I had a star point guard, I wouldn't want Derrick White to be the starter on the team, but the Celtics don't have that. that guy. And what they have is Marcus Smart, and I would much rather have Derrick White being the starting point guard for the Boston Celtics. I think if they did that, I would feel a lot better about them winning the NBA championship at the end of the day. Derrick White is having a great run right now, and I think it could continue if he was the team's starting point guard. Thanks for listening to this edition of Head to Head. I'm Cam McKinney, and there'll be a new episode of the podcast every Monday on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, so please rate, review, and subscribe.